Say you've got a friend who is all pro US dollar and they think US dollar is the best currency and like USD, USD, right? They're fully on that. Say, okay, cool. I will save in Bitcoin predominantly. You save in dollars predominantly. And we'll come back in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Let's see who is better off. Let's see who has more purchasing power at the end of this 20-year experiment. I think it will go to 1 million in due time.
Do you think Trump wins if Elon doesn't buy Twitter?
Excellent question.
Start mining Bitcoin today at marketplace.blockwaresolutions.com.
All right, Zuby, thanks for joining me, man. You have been probably the biggest influencer on the right conservative space that's been vocally pro-Bitcoin. You've been vocal about it for a long time. So I think you're the perfect person to ask this question. What do you think about the politicization of Bitcoin recently with it being a part of Trump's platform? Do you think this is good, bad, inevitable? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. I think that it is inevitable, and I think it is mostly good. I think it's mostly good because it makes it part of the wider conversation. We live in an age and a time, and who knows, maybe the world's always been like this to some degree, but we live in a time where everything can be politicized. And oftentimes everything is being politicized. Sometimes it can be annoying because you might just want to watch some sports on TV and you don't want politics thrown in there. You just want to watch a movie. You don't want politics thrown in there. But I think that due to a lot of factors, a lot of modern people, particularly in the USA, in fact, view a lot of things through somewhat of a political lens, and culture affects politics and politics also affects culture. And if you look at the people who are in politics now, I mean, Donald Trump himself being the most obvious and blatant example, let's remember this is not a man who started as a politician. This guy's been famous since before I was even born. He was a real estate mogul. He was a celebrity on The Apprentice. He's appeared in various movies and TV shows and things like that. And he's a cultural figure. He's not just a political figure. He's been a cultural figure for a lot longer than that. And then you look at the people around him, both in terms of supporters and in terms of people in the administration. So that conversation happening, to me, is good because it makes people aware. The first step to anything is always awareness, right? There was a time when you'd never heard of Bitcoin. There was a time I'd never heard of Bitcoin. Every single person, there was a time you'd never heard about it before. And so there has to be some sort of entry point or gateway for someone. So I think that the fact that it's being discussed at all, let alone being discussed positively, is something that's very positive for Bitcoin as a whole. It also grants it an additional level of legitimacy, which may not matter as much to someone like yourself or myself, but for the typical person who is out there who has heard the word Bitcoin, but who thinks that this is something used by criminals, or it's just a bubble, or it's for scammers, or for this or that. The fact that a future and past president is speaking of it positively, the fact that nations are mining it and buying it, keeping it in their reserves, and there's talk of the USA adding more of it to their reserves, it grants a certain stamp of legitimacy and approval in the way that the ETFs did earlier this year, in the way that it happened when Tesla started buying Bitcoin and people like Elon Musk said positive things about it. So now the fact that it's reaching not just the nation state level, obviously El Salvador was the first nation to make it legal tender, which is a small nation of 6 million people, and it's already leading to some positive things there. But the biggest, not the biggest by population, but the most prominent and powerful nation in the world, which is the United States of America, for them to be speaking of it positively, it's hard to get a bigger stamp of validation and legitimacy than that. That's when it's gone from just being something nerds are talking about online on message boards to, that crazy guy who's mining Bitcoin, to, okay, certain people in the investment space and in the computer science space, to, okay, it's nation state level now. So I think that's a huge deal.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. And you're right. Guys like you and myself, we don't need the government to say, oh, Bitcoin's good before we get into it. But a lot of people do. A lot of people use that appeal to authority. And you're right about the ETFs as well. I thought that was kind of even the best part about it. Not necessarily like, oh yeah, now boomers with a 401ks can buy Bitcoin, but really just the fact that BlackRock, Fidelity, Vanguard, or not Vanguard, but all these institutions are saying, yeah, Bitcoin good, we're willing to offer a Bitcoin product. I think in the minds of a lot of people, it goes from, oh, the government's going to ban it, or my banker says it's bad, to the government is pro-Bitcoin, and my banker says I should have this in my portfolio. And so that's kind of the gateway towards mass adoption. Well, also another good thing I think is that it was the right that adopted Bitcoin instead of the left. I mean, that personally, that makes me very happy. And obviously, I don't think much of the left's values so that they've shown over the last 4 years is kind of aligned with Bitcoin. I think it's...
Do you know something that I think is fascinating about Bitcoin is there's a case for it regardless of someone's political position. I'm not a lefty. I've never been a lefty, but I could propose a pretty strong left-wing case for Bitcoin.
Let's hear it.
Sure. I think there's actually a few. I think that the first thing is a lot of the times when people on the left side of the aisle are criticizing what they call capitalism, it's kind of a misnomer. What they are criticizing, and perhaps they themselves don't know the system well enough to kind of pinpoint it. Like when they're getting mad at the banksters and the what they call the 1%, really it's more like the 0.001%, and they're railing against rich people, and they got angry in the 2008 crash and the bank bailouts and all these, the economy's been ruined and all these dodgy mortgages have been given out, and then bankers are still claiming their bonuses and so on. They're right in the sense that there is something wrong with the system. They're absolutely correct. But they blame the wrong people, right? They should be pointing the fingers at the Fed. They should be pointing their fingers at fractional reserve banking. And once you see through that matrix, it's just like, holy crap, this whole thing is a scam. They're mad at the prices going up. They're mad at inflation, but some of them think it's corporate greed. It's like, no, it's not corporate greed. There's just trillions and trillions and trillions being dumped into, just being printed and typed out of thin air. And that is what's causing this strain on the middle class and the strain on working class families, who you are supposed to be the champions of, right? The problem is there's all this funny money in the system. A lot of people on the left side of the aisle are anti-war. How are all these forever wars funded? They're funded by the same system where trillions and trillions can just be printed and pushed off to future generations. And now you can have the USA all over the world and out here in the Middle East and there and there. But again, this has been happening my entire life. And whether it's Iraq, it's the Gulf Wars, it's what's going on now, and you can't do that if you have sound money. It's much harder to do that, and you can't prolong it in the way that they do. So there's a strong anti-war case for it. There's a strong case for it in terms of empowering the working class and the middle class. On a global level, there are billions of people who still don't have bank accounts. So if you're someone who truly cares about people who are in poverty, people who are unbanked, and you want to level the playing field to some degree, you have to remember that in the vast majority of the world, most of the world has no access to the stock market. If you're an American and you're, over 18 years old, you can buy shares. You can buy shares in Facebook, Amazon, Apple, whatever. 90% of the world has no access to that. And at the same time, their inflation rate is not the 5 to 10% that people in the UK or USA might be complaining about. It might be 20%, 40%, 50%, which means every year, everything you save, if you've got a 100% inflation rate, it's getting cut in half every single year. So all of these people can access Bitcoin. They can buy it, they can hold it. It's 24/7. Remittances. So we're in the UAE right now. There are millions of people here who are working, and they are from India, they're from Bangladesh, they're from Sri Lanka, lots of different countries, Nepal, and they have families back home. Normal remittances, each time they're sending money back to their family, 10%, 5% of it can be going out. They could be using Bitcoin for that. And that money then is not also being devalued. They're saving and storing their labor in something which over the course of time, it's not going to lose value as all fiat money does. It's actually going to gain over time. And so those are multiple angles. So there's the anti-war angle. There is the domestic case. There is the sort of anti-big banking, anti-corporatism case. And then there's the global perspective as well. And I'd say certainly from what the left quote unquote, is supposed to be about, which is making sure that powerful entities and corporations don't go haywire, and looking out for people who are poor and looking out for the working class and the lower middle class. Hey, Bitcoin helps with all of this. So I think that is, I could even go deeper in this argument, but I'd say those are all obvious cases from a more left-leaning side why they should be embracing it.
Yeah, that's spot on. Have you ever heard them say real socialism hasn't been tried?
Of course.
Yeah, I turn it around and say real free market capitalism hasn't been tried. Because
Yeah.
the way all these big banks are able to, give out these crappy mortgages is because the Federal Reserve backstop exists. Under a true free market, they would be punished by going under because they, totally insolvent. But the Federal Reserve just allows them to continue to do that.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. We always expect technology to get better over time. And prior to Bitcoin, one of the few technologies that is much worse now than it has been through most of history is actually money. If you go back 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000, go back 2,000, go back to biblical times. The money they had then was better than what we have now. They were using gold and silver 2,000 plus years ago. You read the Bible, it's gold and silver, right? It's not fiat currency.
Right.
And gold and silver are a better form of money as a store of value than every single government issued or central bank issued currency that exists right now. So we've actually taken a massive step backwards in terms of that technology. We have all of these other innovations, but then we've just got this ridiculous system, which everyone is, part of the problem is it's so embedded and it's so normalized, and it's been like this for everyone who's alive right now. It's been like this pretty much their entire life. So people don't know any different. This is part of why there's such a resistance to Bitcoin, because it's actually very radical. People are used to inflation. People have an expectation that their $100 or their £100 or their €100 is going to be worth less next year and in 10 years and in 50 years than it is right now. And people just accept that, and they think that it's totally normal, and they don't question it. They don't question the fact that it's just assumed that money has to come from the government, right? A lot of people, their objection to Bitcoin is like, oh, well, it's not backed by any government. It's not printed by a central bank. It's like, yeah, that's the good thing about it. It's not owned by anyone. People, it's not backed by anything. I'm like, dude, you'd be amazed how many people still think the dollar is fully backed by gold reserves. Like people don't even know that their money is largely monopoly money. And most of it's not even physical. I say monopoly money. Most of it is just typed out. Most of it is digital. Yeah. It's not even like people have this image of, the Fed, and they're just, they got these machines just churning out this money, right? But the majority of the money in the system is just numbers typed up. And the more someone looks into this, for anyone listening, just look into fractional reserve banking or fractional reserve lending, and it will blow your mind. It will blow your mind. Like, you'll just realize that the whole thing is, oh yeah, it's all a scam. It's like one huge giant scam, and we're all being screwed over by it. Even people in the so-called 1%. The typical rich person in the USA, UK, or any other nation, they're not part of this system. They have no say in it. It just goes, and there's a very, very tiny fraction of. We don't even know who the Fed isn't even part of the U.S. government. The Fed's basically a private corporation. And we don't know who the shareholders are. They have them, but we don't actually know who the shareholders are. So the deeper you look into it, you're just like, oh wow, this is quite the scam. And we didn't learn anything about this in school or in university or in any place. You have to go out and search for that information, which thankfully now we can do.
Yeah, I found Bitcoin in late 2020. Actually, you were one of the first kind of touch points I had with it. Nice. But I feel blessed at that point. There was so much good content about Bitcoin. It felt easy to learn versus I can imagine if you find it in 2013 or even 16 or 17, there's a lot more noise, like a lot more difficult to sort through what's going on. I thought in 2023 when Silicon Valley Bank went under, I thought people would realize it then. Like I thought fractional reserve banking and its flaws would click, but I'm kind of surprised it hasn't. Do you think the USA is going to be the Bitcoin capital of the world? And is that good or bad?
I think in terms of the amount of Bitcoin held and its value, probably, just because it's such a wealthy country and you've got over through probably what people say 330 million. People have been saying 330 million people for years. I think the US population is probably closer to 400 million. I'd say you at least have over 350 million people for sure. There's a lot of money in that country, biggest, most powerful government. So I think it would probably be the leader in that sense. I doubt it will be the leader in terms of adoption rates. I think that that is more likely to be a developing country because the weaker your economy and the weaker your currency, actually, the more obvious the case for Bitcoin is. Part of the resistance to Bitcoin in our nations is the fact that relatively, compared to historic times and compared to the rest of the world, our economies are doing well and stable. So it's true that the Fed is a scam, fractional reserve banking is a scam, but it's an even greater scam in many other nations because they're just doing even more money printing and their economy is not as strong to begin with in terms of employment rates and entrepreneurship, business, innovation. So I think it's most likely that in terms of adoption rate, in terms of, say, a percentage of the population that are Bitcoin holders, I think that's more likely to be Nigeria or an El Salvador or a Turkey, somewhere like that, because the use case is just very obvious. But yeah, I think in terms of the amount held, the amount of wealth held in Bitcoin, it's going to be the USA.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty accurate. Do you think that could change though if the US continues on this path it's headed? I mean, it's 35 trillion in debt. You're starting to see the interest payments alone every year be as much as we spend on the entire military. So to me, it's slowly starting to snowball out of control. And it's something, people on the right think that, Trump can get the debt and the deficit under control. I don't think so. I mean, it's kind of a math equation at this point, right? Because you have Social Security and Medicare. You can't really cut that spending. Like that would be political suicide for anybody to suggest that. You could, in theory, cut military spending, but I highly doubt that's going to happen. So I foresee the U.S. and the U.S. dollar kind of heading down the same path as a lot of these other fiat currencies. Do you see it the same way?
They can kick that can down the road a long time, and they've been doing it. They've been doing it. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people were saying exactly what you're saying, and you're correct. You can't kick the can down the road infinitely. And I'm not sophisticated enough in my financial and economic knowledge to know exactly what that $37 trillion debt exactly means and all of its implications and what will happen when the chickens come home to roost. I know it's bad. I know it's bad, but I don't really know when that will happen. Obviously, no leader will want that to be under their administration, so they're incentivized to keep kicking that can down the road because, look, most people don't feel it. This is the thing. People have to feel something to care. So you can tell someone that, hey, the national debt is $37 trillion. Most people would be like, I intuitively know that that's bad. But what does that mean? How does that affect me? Their day-to-day life is normal. It still seems. That's one of the strangest, one of the weirdest things to me about the USA is like, I believe most Americans are in debt, right? Most Americans technically would have a negative net worth, I believe.
Yeah.
But you go to the country and it's full of brand new cars and big houses and everyone's going out to eat in all these restaurants. And it seems like most people have lots of money. But then if you were to actually sort of x-ray their finances, you'll be like, wait, this person's in the negatives. But they've got like 2 or 3 cars and they've got this nice house and whatever. It seems like there's this huge illusion going on. There's so much smoke and mirrors. And I've never quite known what to make of it. I find the US a very paradoxical country. It's strange. It's like in so many ways, it's so advanced and wealthy and there's all this opportunity and so great. And then you kind of do a bit of an x-ray and you're like, a lot of this is smoke and mirrors. How long can this be maintained? Is there a point where it's kind of like a Jenga tower?
Yeah.
And I'm like, surely at some point something's gonna give here, and it's gonna just bring that tower collapsing. That was part of what happened with the 2008 financial crisis, right? It was just like they'd been building up this tower, this house of cards for decades, and it seems like everything is fine, and then subprime mortgage crisis, that domino falls, and then it leads to a chain reaction, and suddenly, house prices start collapsing and people start losing their jobs, and there's this and there's this. But then there was never, and obviously that's what Bitcoin was birthed out of.
Right.
But there was never what's the right word for it? There was never a true reckoning. And the people who were responsible for it just got off scot-free, if not made money. It's very similar to the 2020 to 2022 period, which I refer to as the scamdemic, where, who's been held accountable? Where's the clarity? Where are the answers? We still, bit by bit, they're leaking out kind of like, oh, yeah, maybe it did come from a lab, maybe this, maybe that, but there's no real transparency and accountability. And even the general population has kind of just moved on and hasn't been like, wait, no, hang on. We just went through a 2 to 3 year period of madness, right? Mm-hmm. According to the official statistics, millions of people died supposedly from the virus, and then millions more from things unrelated, and there were locked. I don't know how many hundreds of millions of people lost their jobs. I don't know how many people they had family members or friends die and they weren't able to see them. There was just so much destruction, and it's just like, oh, okay, next thing. It's like, wait, no, hang on. There has to be, we need some clarity, we need some answers. But if that's not demanded by the people, it doesn't happen. And I think that's kind of just where we are with this whole situation. There's not a lot of, you think about this and I think about this, but the average American on the street, if you ask the average American, what's the national debt? I would be surprised if more than 20% of people could even ballpark it.
Yeah.
Let alone have some sort of inkling as to what that means, who's the debt owed to, who's supposed to pay it. And the answer is your generation.
Yeah.
Right? Or like your future kids or what, like that's what's happening. And I think that people don't, there is a bit of a selfishness to it, where each generation, as long as they don't have to foot the bill, they're tacitly okay. Don't think, I'm not trying to, I don't think this is malicious, because I don't think most people think about it this way. They're not thinking that, oh, okay, all of this overspending, this, say you take someone in the boomer generation, they're not going to live forever, right? They will pass away one day, in the next few decades, realistically. And they're not thinking, they're thinking about their retirement, they're thinking about their pension, they're thinking about their house price and all of these things, their equity. Very few of them will be thinking, wait, all of this spending and all of this debt racking up, that is being passed on to my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. At some point, someone has to pay the piper. But I think most people just think, okay, well, my bank account looks fine, my retirement looks fine, whatever, so everything is okay. We're not seeing riots and wars out in the street. Everything is okay. But at some point, some generation, a group of people is going to have to pay that. And that's going to mean that the belt is going to need to be massively tightened. All these things that you said that no politician wants to cut the spending on, they're gonna have to. At some point, they're going to have to. Just like if you are an individual, if you think of yourself as an individual, if you had say you were $100,000 in debt, and each year another 20Ks being added to it, 200 grand, 300, you're $1 million in debt. You can get, and people do this on an individual level, right? There's people walking around with $1 million in debt, and they sort of seem to be okay. To an outsider, you wouldn't look at that person and be like, oh gosh, that guy is in gigantic financial trouble, because they're not lying, they're not sitting on the street shaking a cup. But that guy sitting on the street shaking a cup actually has a higher net worth than the guy $1 million in debt. But it doesn't seem like it. It's the smoke and mirrors. But at some point, that guy with the debt is going to have to, I don't know the way out of that, pay it off, declare some type of, bankruptcy, default. There's going to become a time where he's got to do something about it.
Yeah. Well, if you're the guy, you're SOL, but if you're the government, you got a money printer. So that's your way out. And I think the reason that fiat money this system has been able to go on for so long is because, like you said, it's very confusing and difficult for the average person to understand. Versus Bitcoin, it's super simple. 21 million, divisible, portable. It's ideally like the perfect monetary system. The Bitcoin white paper is only 9 pages long. It doesn't take that much to explain it. If you made a white paper for the fiat monetary system with all the debt and repos and all this stuff, like Federal Reserve, different banks, like it would take 1,000 pages to explain.
And I want to say, I understand that stuff better than the average person, and I don't understand it. So what I'm saying here, like, I'm just trying to explain at a very high level of what I understand, because I don't even know the inner working. Like, it's extraordinarily complex how they do all of this stuff. I'm just explaining it in sort of layman understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's purposefully confusing by design. Going back to kind of where we started this conversation with Bitcoin being politicized, we've seen, guys like David Bailey and sort of forming a Bitcoin lobby, so to speak. And, some people in the Bitcoin community are like, oh yeah, Trump being pro-Bitcoin is what won him the election. I don't think it's like that extreme yet. There was a lot of other stuff going on, but I do think long-term, the Bitcoin lobby, so to speak, is going to become more powerful. I mean, right now, the most powerful lobbies in America would be the military-industrial complex and Big Pharma, I would say. Do you foresee Bitcoin or Bitcoiners getting to that level of, the Bitcoin price goes up, we have so much wealth, we're able to influence the political scene in that kind of way?
I hope so. It would take a long time. I think that's a multi-decade thing. One reason I'm optimistic is because I believe that the truth always penetrates eventually. It takes time. But if you have something that is corrupt, then the only way you can maintain corruption is through censorship and suppression. But if you actually allow people to speak and share ideas and discuss and debate, the good ideas tend to win out. It might take 1 year, it might take 10 years, it might take 50 years, but the good ideas win out. It's part of why I think you should always be suspicious of whenever people want to censor. Because if you are speaking what you believe to be the truth and your ideas are good, then they can stand up to criticism. They can stand up to scrutiny. You have no desire to censor other people because it's like, no, well, what I'm saying is valid and is correct and I can back it up. If you're lying, if you're saying something that's complete nonsense, then, right, if I'm saying that 1 + 1 = 3, the only way I can maintain that illusion and convince other people is if I suppress others. I need to now put in a law saying if you say 1 + 1 = 2, you're going to get banned from social media, or we're going to debank you, or at an extreme, we're going to throw you in prison, or we're going to punish you or something. That's the only way you can maintain that level of lie. This is why in every fascistic or communist regime, they have very heavy censorship, very heavy suppression, and very heavy propaganda, because to maintain the lie, to maintain the illusion, you have to be able to do that. If you actually let people talk, it's going to collapse, right?
Yeah.
Why is North Korea the way it is? Because they don't allow information in, they don't allow information or people out, right? It's so suppressed, no internet, all the TV, all the radio, all of it is state controlled, because if they allowed it in, it'll collapse. It'll collapse the entire regime. So, and I know, as I'm saying, I know the North Korean regime will fall. It will, at some point. I don't know if it's going to be, I think it's probably in my lifetime. I don't know the timing, but it will collapse because you cannot maintain such a large lie for such a long time. It's the same reason all the communistic regimes, they fell.
Yeah.
They fell. You can maintain it for some time, too long. But at some point, the truth is going to come through. So I think it's similar in terms of the question that you were asking. I think that one thing about Bitcoin is it's just got such strong fundamentals. It's got such strong fundamentals. So it's like, okay, say you've got a friend who is all pro US dollar, and they think US dollar is the best currency, and like USD, USD, right? They're fully on that, and they're anti-Bitcoin. Say, okay, cool. I will save in Bitcoin predominantly. You save in dollars predominantly, and we'll come back in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Let's say we both save the equivalent of 100,000, make it $1 million over the course of 2 decades. Let's see who is better off. Let's see who has more purchasing power at the end of this 20-year experiment. And you know what? If somehow, Bitcoin fails and it crashes out, and it ends up being worth very little, and then somehow, maybe the dollar's worth half of what it was before, but it's got more purchasing power, you could concede and say, you know what? Hey, you were right, Mr. Fiat, right? Like you were correct. So it's like, okay, let's wait and see.
Yeah.
It's why I get to a point where, anyone I care about and I love, I will naturally push towards Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't get super emotional about it, because I'm like, okay, once I've told you and I've explained it to you, it's up to you to make your choice. Yeah. Like it's like that with everything, and that's also part of freedom, right? Yeah. That is also part of freedom. I encourage everybody to go to the gym and lift weights and eat good food and so on. I'm not going to be hovering over millions of people every day, like trying to. It's like, yo, bro, look, I've tried to sell it to you. It's ultimately up to you. Again, hey, in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, we'll see what I look like. We'll see what you look like. We'll see what our blood panels are looking like and how we're feeling.
Yeah.
And, we'll see. Proof will be in the pudding.
Right. It's like I saw this, because RFK's been super anti-seed oil. I saw a liberal, chugging seed oils. It's like, all right, you do that, we'll eat meat and all that, and we'll see who's right.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about financial markets. Is it's one of the few areas in life where you can get objective truth. Like there's a scoreboard. I take my position, you take yours. In 5-10 years, we'll know who's right. Really, in any other domain, you don't really get that, right? If you're debating political ideas, like maybe over centuries we'll see a certain regime try a certain political theory, but we won't be around to actually know who is right.
But you know what's cool? In the USA, you kind of have that within your nation, though, because you have the 50 states, because of federalism. So in the US is running multiple experiments all the time.
Yeah, good point.
If you take each state as an experiment, you can see in real time, okay, I mean, this happened. Wasn't it in Oregon a couple of years ago where I think it was in 2021 or around then, where they did decide to do the whole drug decriminalization thing, right? And just say, okay, we're just going to decriminalize and or legalize all drugs. And, we believe that it's going to lead to X, Y, and Z. And other people who oppose it are like, I think it's going to lead to A, B, and C. You run the experiment. 2-3 years later, they're already trying to roll back and reverse that policy, because it did not result in what the predominantly progressives thought they would do, right? Hey, okay, we're going to run an experiment where we let's downgrade criminal damage and shoplifting under $950 to a misdemeanor. That's no longer a felony. Let's make it a misdemeanor. And also, let's defund the police too. Okay? Other people are like, no, I don't think we should do that. It's going to lead to bad. So, all right, you run your experiment. We run our experiment over here. You see the results in real time. So you definitely have that on a global level, but I think an interesting thing with the US is because each state has quite a lot of control over its own laws. Again, you can see the results. And you see the results in terms of the migration patterns. Why are people leaving California and moving to Nevada, moving to Texas? Why are people streaming out of New York and heading on down to Florida and so on? You can see it all. And I think the strongest voting, actually, I think the two strongest forms of voting are with your feet and with your wallet.
Yeah, very well said. I definitely agree. And the whole legalization of drugs, it creates an interesting conversation around freedom, right? It's like, so-and-so, they should be free to shoot up heroin and take meth and all this stuff. But then you realize someone who's addicted to these drugs, they're not free in any sense. They're a slave to that passion, to that addiction.
Dude, it's very interesting. And I mean, I know you just landed, you haven't even been here a day. You're in a really interesting country for what we're discussing right now, because the UAE and other Gulf states, they operate very differently in many ways to the USA or other Western nations. So with what we're talking about, drugs here are absolutely illegal. Mm-hmm. You can get the death penalty for trafficking drugs here, right? Drugs, 100% illegal. What were you saying earlier? Oh, it's so clean. It feels so safe. It's real, right? Like, I haven't seen any homeless people. I wonder if there's a connection.
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing here is, the whole tax conversations. You're in a country with 0% personal tax, 0% capital gains tax. They've just introduced 9% corporate tax on profits over $100,000 per year. So you're essentially in a tax-free country. Are there roads? Are there amenities? Right. So again, if someone is like, hey, income tax should be abolished. The USA didn't used to have income tax.
Yeah.
And the country functioned and thrived for a pretty long time, right? It was supposed to be a temporary measure. And now if someone were to come out and say, hey, let's abolish income tax, even people on the right will be like, are you crazy? Right? People have gotten so used to 30, 40, sometimes when you really do the math, like almost 50% of everything they earn going to straight back to the government.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because when you look especially globally, if you look at places like Singapore, one of the cleanest, safest, like super ultra low taxes. Again, very strong anti-drug policies. Same Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman. So you're actually in a part of the world where you can in real time see, okay. And I'd assume you don't feel. Do you feel oppressed here? Do you feel like, oh, no one here has any freedom or whatever, right? Like that's because that's the mentality so many people in the West have. Okay? If I even tell someone I live in Dubai, right? Some people are like, oh, that's cool. I've heard interesting things, but other people are like, oh my gosh, and I grew up in Saudi Arabia as well, right? So what people imagine in their head is just like this horrible, oppressive. You're not allowed to say anything, right? They might even be amazed that we're allowed to do a podcast. Right. It's just like, bro, like, it's not what you've been sold a lie.
Yeah.
Right. You've been sold a lie, and I think these experiments are interesting because you can see how things play out in different places. And the truth is, as well, is not every jurisdiction should have the same laws at all. Like there are certain things which, of course, are universal, right? But places have different demographics, different population sizes, different histories, different cultures, different religious backgrounds. And you shouldn't expect, I think sometimes people have this expectation that everywhere should look like, Norway, or everywhere should look like this. And it's like, no, it just doesn't work that way. It's the same with the whole spreading democracy thing, right? Again, we're not in a democracy here.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a monarchy, right?
Yeah. We're not in a democracy. I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
right. Like, okay, that's fine, right? But people are like, no, this is the only way it can be done, right? It must be this way. And I'm just like, no. And not every nation, not every peoples even want that.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like you go to every country that is not a democracy and the people are, wanting to completely flip. It's like, no, in many cases, that's actually how they want it, and it functions and it works well for them. You may not like it. You may not want to live there. You may have certain critiques and things all back and forth, and that's totally fine. But I think people need to get away from this idea of every nation and every continent needs to look exactly like, not even my country, but like my neighborhood and the people around me and their values of these people I went to college with. It's just like, no, right? If you're some dude in Palo Alto, right, Uganda does not want to run their government the same way that you do, right? And you'd probably find it pretty audacious if people in Uganda were trying to tell you how to run your things over there in California, right? So maybe you shouldn't sort of have this audacity to want to go around the entire world and do your ideological colonization.
Yeah, it's like, why are the bureaucrats in D.C. telling a farmer in the middle of Iowa how he should operate and live his life? It's ridiculous. I was born in 2000, so basically 9/11 happened the year after I was born. I remember all growing up, a lot of propaganda about this area of the world. Like, it's super dangerous. They hate Americans. You never want to go there. And like, I feel the total opposite. I mean, you go to a fast food or coffee shop in America, the service is just like, oh, what you want? Like, they don't even want you here. Like, so
except
rude.
Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, except Chick-fil-A. First, I'm here. Everyone's holding the door for me. Oh, nice to meet you. Yeah, thanks for coming. Super polite.
Very hospitable here.
Yeah.
Very hospitable. Carry on.
Yeah. Do you think Trump wins if Elon doesn't buy Twitter?
Excellent question. Maybe, but not by the same degree. Maybe, but not by the same degree.
Yeah.
Especially with the Electoral College, it's always a bit of a toss-up because it comes down to a relatively small number of states, so it can kind of go either way. I think there's a good chance he wouldn't have won the popular vote. Maybe he still would have kind of done it 2016 with the Electoral College, but I don't know. But with that said, I think Elon, and I don't say this lightly, because Elon is doing and has done a lot of great things and will do more great things in the future. I think that him making that purchase might end up being the most important thing that he ultimately did for humanity, not just for America, but for the world. Because the media, the social media and big tech censorship industrial complex, as I call it, is really getting out of hand. I've been on social media for 20 years, man.
That's crazy.
I joined Facebook in 2004. I've been on YouTube since 2006. I've been on Twitter since June 2009. I've been on Instagram, I think, since 2010. So I've seen these things through their different iterations. And I'm not just someone who's on social media, but I use it.
Yeah.
Right? I use it actively, and I have done since I started out in my music career. So you see them go through all these different chops and changes, and you feel and you can tell when. So it's interesting. Let's say from the mid 2000s until about 2013, 2014, it was pretty free. It was pretty free. Like, it didn't feel restricted and people were getting banned and suspended and whatever, and all this shadow banning and all. Like, there wasn't talk of all that, right? You could pretty much say what you wanted to say on Twitter or on Facebook in 2011, as long as you're not threatening violence or making some terroristic threat, something crazy like that, right? And then the walls started to close in from like the mid 2010s. It really, from like 2015 to about 2021, that was the window where the walls were just closing in. And I remember that. I remember the day that Alex Jones got banned. I remember when Milo Yiannopoulos got banned. I remember when Gavin McInnes. There were certain people, like, all on the right, pretty much, right? The only person from the left I remember specifically getting banned was Louis Farrakhan. But it was these are some of the big ones. But for each big one, there's another probably a couple thousand smaller accounts that were just getting yeeted. And it just, the Overton window was just closing. And then, of course, during the whole COVID time, it got even more sketchy. And they were banning doctors. And then it got to the point where they banned the US president. Like, people forget this. People forget that.
Yeah.
Think of how insane that is. You banned the US president from social media. Like, this, to this day, this should be a much bigger conversation.
Yeah.
In the same way that the fact they tried to kill him twice over the past couple months should be a bigger conversation, but people have these goldfish memories.
Yeah.
And so that was such a tipping point. You're just like, wait, these platforms are out of control. Whether you love Trump, hate Trump, don't care about him, whatever, the idea that he should not be able to have a platform. I mean, you want to talk election interference, gosh. Yeah. Like, that is scary. If they can do that to the sitting US president, what chance do you or I have of, like, they could just, whatever day, they're just like, you know what, you're gone. Yeah. And that's scary. It's not scary because, oh, everyone needs to be on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever, but it's scary because this is the public square now. This is where the conversations happen. I believe that at this point, about 5 billion people in the world are on social media. Like, this is all around the world. This is how people are connecting and communicating. This is where people are getting their information. More people are getting their news from social media than from the TV. Times have changed. So if you disable someone from being able to do that and they can no longer partake in the conversation, and you're just like, all right, this person's gone, that person's gone, then it doesn't just alter people's ability to speak, it alters people's ability to think. Because your thinking is limited unless you're able to speak. Okay? If either of us were just sitting in this room by ourselves and we were just thinking, we're more limited than we are now. Mm-hmm. The fact we're having a conversation, I'm thinking as I'm speaking, I'm thinking. You're listening and you're thinking,
right.
And then you say something and I'm thinking. So our ideas are just bouncing off each other. This happens in the real world. It happens online as well. It's part of why communication is so important. And that's how people can eventually get to the truth. If I say something that's crazy or it doesn't make sense to you, you can go, wait, hang on, what do you mean by that? Or actually, here's my position. And then we can have that back and forth, and we both leave a little bit wiser, a little bit smarter, a little bit more empathetic too, because you have a better idea of what other people think. So even if you have a conversation with someone who you very much disagree with on lots of big topics, at a minimum, you'll walk away with a better understanding of how that person and people like that think. And you'll also be a bit more empathetic, because you might be like, okay, I don't hold those exact same positions or values, or I don't have the same prescription, but I can at least understand where that person is coming from. And if you're not able to do that, it actually is pretty dangerous for the social fabric, because what happens, and you've seen this especially in the USA, where you end up with a situation where you have people who think that at least half of the country is evil. Not that they're wrong, not that they're misguided, not even that they're stupid, but that they're evil. And I think that whether you're someone who leans more right or leans more left or more liberal, however you label yourself or not, if you are walking around thinking that you are in a nation, say in the USA, where over 150 million, 170 million of the people sharing this landmass with you are wicked or just evil, that's really dangerous. It's really dangerous, because it can lead to very dark places and very dark things. Well, why would someone try to make an attempt on Donald Trump's life? It's probably because for the past 8 years, you've been convincing millions of people that he's the next coming of Hitler, that he's going to raise a genocide, that he's an existential threat to individuals' lives. Because, I mean, if that were true, you can justify... Right. Then it's like, oh, actually, it's that old question that people always ask, what if you could go back in time and would you kill baby Hitler, kind of thing, right? And it's just, it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous, because there's only 3 ways you can solve a conflict. It doesn't matter if it's between friends, if it's between nations, if it's between yourself and your future spouse. It doesn't matter who it is. There's only 3 ways you can solve a conversation. Number 1 is conversation. Any 3 ways you can solve a conflict, right? Number 1 is conversation. Conversation, debate, discussion, diplomacy. Number 2, separation. Separation, segregation, divorce. You go my way, you go your way, I go my way. We just don't interact. And that way we don't have conflict. Or number 3, physical violence. That's all we have.
Yeah.
Those are the only tools in our arsenal. So if you shut down number 1, and then number 2 is not an option, because everyone's like, hey, we're all in the same city or state or nation or whatever. Like, we can't just separate like this. Then ultimately you will leave people where they feel like, hey, the only option now is number 3. And if these people are as evil and as wicked and do genuinely want to harm me and harm my family and harm my friends, then that's when violence becomes justified in people's minds. Even the most reasonable and Christ-like person would generally agree that, hey, if you and your family are under physical threat, it is justified to retaliate.
Yeah.
So you don't want to create an environment and conditions where you've got millions of people believing that, hey, these aren't just people I have some disagreements with politically or culturally or religiously. These are people who want to hurt me and harm me. And I see in the last 10 years in particular, I've seen a lot of that language. And it's part of why I'm very careful, both online and offline, in how I speak on some of these topics, because I'm very careful of just like making a blanket label
Right.
Of, and there are people on both sides of the aisle who I wish would be a bit more careful with the rhetoric, right? I do believe that there are certain positions and things that people can promote, and there are certain actions that I would say are evil or are wicked. But to just blanketly label, the left are evil.
Yeah.
All Democratic voters, right? When they're there, like, all the Trump voters are, not, it's like, whoa, that's a crazy thing to say. That's a crazy thing to say. Everyone who voted Trump, or everyone who voted, like, which in either direction.
Right.
It's a crazy thing to say that they're just evil. You could say, here's why I think they're wrong, or here's why I vote differently, or here's what I think they should. That's all good, but those conversations need to happen. It can't just be like, okay, we're there, you're there, and we just hate each other. It's not good. And it's supposed to be, last point on this, the name of the country is the USA. I'm from the UK, and we're in the UAE, right? So I have a lot of affinity for the three nations united.
Yeah.
All of them united is in the name. So it's important for all the differences, for all the diversity, you have to, at a minimum, be able to maintain that level of civility. I think that's very important.
Yeah. It's weird how on the internet that kind of separation of idea and person and their character happens, because I can tweet something and someone will reply, oh, you believe such, XYZ heinous things. I'm like, you've never even talked to me. You don't know me. You're just taking, my position on one thing and extrapolating it to others. That's why I actually think Twitter or X Spaces are amazing, right? Because you can actually have this dialogue versus, posting, replying back and forth. You don't get that same kind of connection there.
Before we move to the next question, I have an interesting point on what you just said. And I've thought a lot about why that is, again, as someone who's been online for such a long time. And I think one of the big reasons is because on these platforms, and Twitter/X in particular, I like to say that conversations happen in reverse. Conversations happen backwards in those platforms. And that's why that exact phenomenon you described, that's why that happens.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is, if you meet someone in the real world, how do your conversations start?
Hello, nice to meet you.
Common ground. Break the ice, common ground, build rapport. Maybe then if you've been talking for, probably an hour plus, then you might get into some more contentious topics if that is the mood. Okay? However, on X, you go on there, everyone goes on there and just shouts an opinion. Here's my opinion on abortion. Here's my opinion on taxes. Here's my opinion on immigration. Here's my opinion on religion. So it's starting from a point of contention. Because then the person responding is someone who disagrees with whatever it is you said, right? Now this person's jumping in, and it's like, oh, okay, so you're starting now from a point of disagreement. So now they will infer all these other things onto you, and you might infer all these other things onto them, right? So they're like, okay, well, I'm going to assume that you hold all these other beliefs, right? You haven't even explained your first one, really. It's just a few characters, but and now it's already a battle.
Yeah.
Whereas if you'd met in person, you'd probably have been like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. Oh, what's your name? Oh, where are you from? Oh, cool. Oh, nice. I know some, I've been there a couple of times. Oh, you have that conversation. And that's why in the real world, part of why, people interactions are just so much better. Like I'd imagine that no matter where you are or where you travel to, it's pretty darn rare to just like get in a conflict with someone.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like you just walk, right? It's not like you're just walking around the street every day. You're like just walking around New York and you're just like butting heads with people. It's just like, no, that doesn't happen. But online, I mean, as we speak right now, I'm sure someone is, multiple people are going to be shouting at me.
Comment warriors.
Yeah, right now. And I'm not aware of it. Like, I don't really care. But it's just like, that's how it goes. And then, of course, additional factors. You can't see the person. You can't read body language. There's no tone. People forget they're dealing with humans because they're just seeing a little picture on a screen. Yeah. And it kind of falls apart. Yeah,
it's funny. I've had interactions like that online, and then I go to a Bitcoin conference, I meet the person IRL, and it's great. It's all pleasant. Like, of course. Yeah, none of that. People say nasty stuff in the comments. I've never had anybody come up to me at a conference or anything, like in the streets, say whatever. Have you? I mean, you've got a giant audience. Has anybody ever actually tried you IRL?
Nope. Yeah. Not once.
I wouldn't either. You're pretty muscular guy.
Yeah. Not once. I've had people say that, hey, when I first, I've had a couple people, I remember one Black American woman, actually, I remember I met her in Vegas, and she was like, when I first came across your stuff online, like, I didn't like you. Mm-hmm. And then I actually started following you, and like you're now one of my favorite people on social media. I was like, oh wow, thank you. I was like, and thanks for the honesty, right? Because I don't know what post she saw, right? But it was probably one that's a bit spicy.
Yeah.
And so it forms this immediate opinion, and then over time it's like, oh, okay, no, this guy's not some whatever I first imagined. It's not that. Or I've had people be I remember specifically, I was at the San Francisco airport. And I was like waiting to get a drink or something. And this guy came up to me. He was like, are you Zuby? I could tell he was like a lefty just by looking at him. He really had the look. And he was like, man, like I disagree with you on a lot of things, but I think you're one of the most sensible people on the right. And like I find myself respecting you even if we like disagree on a lot of stuff. And I was like, man, like I appreciate that, bro. Like I don't expect everyone to like agree with me on everything, right?
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you can at least see that I'm not I don't have some evil intention.
Right.
And I have zero animosity towards you or anyone else out there, and we can have that conversation. I mean, I had I'll tell you one story that was funny. Mm-hmm. In 2022, I spoke at a university in Florida, and that was my first time being protested. Mm. It wasn't my first time seeing protesters at an event I'm speaking at, but I was the only speaker, and they came specifically to protest me. So that was the first time I'd experienced that, and that was a little.
That's the rite of passage, right there.
Yeah, that was a little weird. Like I'd seen it happen online to other people, Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh or whatever, and then I was like, oh wow, these people are all here for me. Like a couple dozen protesters came, and that was interesting. But I also, I totally took the wind out of their sails. Yeah. At least half of them left like, hey, I like that guy. They came there wanting to believe that I was a hateful bigot who's all the phobias, right? Yeah. And all the isms, and then they left like, oh no, he's not those things. He was actually very, very kind to us as well. I actually stayed at the event an extra 2 hours.
Really?
After I finished speaking, and both with supporters and with some people who came to protest, and just having conversations, and again, they came with their signs and their chants and whatever. And then after the event, how do those conversations go? How's it going, man? What's your name?
Yeah, pretty cordial.
Nice to meet you. What are you studying? Cool. And then I was like, I'm interested. What made you decide to come here this evening to protest me? And they were like, oh, well, I heard from some of my friends that you're like transphobic, and I have friends in the LGBT community, and I was told that you like hate them and this and that. And I was like, okay. After listening to my speech and the Q&A, do you believe that? And they're like, no, like I don't totally agree with all your positions on this or that, but no, like I don't, it takes the wind out of their sails because they want you to be hateful. Like they're like anticipating that, oh my gosh, because hey, they've taken 3-4 hours out of their evening to come protest. So it's like, okay, this guy had better be the dragon we came to slay. And then you're just like super nice to them, answering all their questions. Right. Yeah, it was fun. It was interesting.
That's kind of the main problem with censorship, right? Is if people get kicked off the platform, the only thing you know about them is what the mainstream media says, what's on their Wikipedia page, whatever, versus actually hearing their ideas from the horse's mouth. And I think we're running out of time here. I got one more question for you. Man. All right. Elon, love that he bought X. I think he's a great businessman. I respect a lot of what he's doing. The brain chips freak me out.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Yeah, so you'd never get one?
No. I hope to. I want to live a long life, but there are some potential future technologies that I feel like I don't want to live to witness on this mortal coil. And I have zero concerns about the initial stages of it. Of course, when I interviewed him, I did ask him. I had to ask him about this because I'm not. Look, if the goal is to restore sight to someone who's blind or to help someone who's, lame to walk, and you can do that with technology, why would I oppose that? To me, the danger is when it's people who are totally physically and mentally capable, and they just want to basically become superhuman. Mm-hmm. And then it creates, game theory kicks in, and it creates this arms race where, just like right now, if you don't own a smartphone, you can live and you can survive, but it's pretty hard. Yeah. So when smartphones came in like 2007, you didn't need one. But now in 2024, it's pretty tough to navigate things. You might not even be able to pay your parking or scan your restaurant menu if you don't have a smartphone. And I do have a genuine concern on a lot of levels about a stage of humanity where it's transhumanism,
Yeah.
where you have to physically alter you. You're now inputting technology to people. We've decided that, hey, God's creation is not good enough. And we now need to modify with this chip created by a company. It's not something you use in a device. No, we're putting this inside your brain, not because there's something wrong with you, just because, hey, we need to do that. That's I don't like that.
Yeah, to me, it smells an awful lot like the mark of the beast.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah. Last question.
All good.
Bitcoin price 2025. What's your base case?
Yeah, I mean, I don't normally do public price predictions because obviously that can go very wrong. I would think between $150,000 to $250,000, most likely. I can think of a more bullish case where it goes far beyond that in this cycle, but I think conservatively, I could say 150 to 250K per coin would be pretty reasonable and fairly conservative.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the wild card for me is like not Bitcoin, it's the dollar. How much money, how many fiat currency units do they print? Because it could easily go to 1 million, but they don't print obsessively.
I think it will go to 1 million in due time.
Yeah.
I don't think this cycle, unless something really just changes, or we get that nation state, really, really start stockpiling it.
Yeah.
I think that could take it well over 1 million. But I think for this particular cycle, I don't personally think this is the super cycle, but I'll be prepped either way.
Yeah. Really appreciate it, Zuby. This has been great. Where do you want to send the audience?
Say that again?
Where do you want to send the audience? Any links
sure.
or anything?
Yeah, so people can find me on all social media at Zuby Music. That is ZUBY Music. And I have a podcast called Real Talk with Zuby. I've had a lot of great people on there, including Elon Musk. So just search for Zuby, ZUBY, on any platform, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, you'll find me.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Appreciate it.